Yeah.
And welcome back to another episode of Underground Antics. My guest with me today is the great Dave Stevens. Your work and, existence in the world covers many different areas from, executive coaching, facilitation, leadership training. You're a musician, you're an artist, you're an author, you're a family man, and just an all-around creative thinker. And I look forward to our conversation today about the creative process. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
So how about we start off today with just a quick discussion on what exactly, creativity is. What does it mean to you to be creative? And that can mean either when you're doing, writing music or poetry or even in the corporate environment and you're trying to teach creative thinking. How do you go about that process?
Geez, you start off with a great hard question. Great hard question. Thank you. But creativity is such a fascinating thing for me because I don't actually know how to define it. Mm-hmm. And I've never actually tried to define creativity. I've read lots of books on creativity, but I think it wasn't the books that taught me creativity. From a young age, I just remember being creative. But if I look back, I remember all the kids around me being creative. So I think if I could nutshell it, creativity for me is really being in the zone. And so that takes away being an artist. You when I say being an artist, painting or writing songs or whatever, that's people think creativity. They think you're doing these hobby kinds of activities. But I think when you're in the zone and you're doing something that you are so passionate about that you look up and time has disappeared. You could be working electronics or sanding something, I don't know. But you look up and this time has disappeared and you just wish you could keep doing it for the whole day. I think that for me is what creativity is. And really it's a channel space, I feel,
Mm-hmm. Channel
you're plugged
space
in somewhere.
Right, like you're connecting to something that's like manifesting through you at that moment.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. And you can find it in parts of your work as well. You might find parts of your work where you just disappear. Maybe you struggle through your job, but there are parts of your job that you think, and as I'm talking, and I will apologize, my mind will shoot off through this conversation. But and I always remember in school, there were certain subjects where you went, oh, wow, Thursday afternoon, double art, or Thursday afternoon, double English, and you got really excited. I think that's a form of creativity. That's a passion coming through. So if you're doing something and you're plugged into that channel, as I call it, the radar's mm-hmm. up and it's just coming through you, I think that's the zone.
Yeah. And you're right. I think it's difficult to define, right? Because it can manifest in all sorts of ways, which is not, typically we think of creativity as like a kind of skill or something that some people have and some people don't have. And it's, thought to be reserved for the arts and the music or graphic design or anything along those lines. Whereas in reality, creativity comes through anything that you're doing with some degree of passion. And as you say, like when you're in that zone, right, it's like a meditation where you're not really thinking. I mean, you're using your mind, sure, but you're not exactly trying to solve problems and work out what's what. You're just focused and just doing whatever it is that you're doing, right?
Yeah.
And I guess what happens then is if you have like drawing skills or musical skills or something like that, then you can use that creativity to create a work of art. And then depending on, what you're doing it for, it doesn't really matter like how it comes out if you enjoy the process, I think, particularly if you're just doing it for the sake of doing it and really just enjoying your time. You don't have to be trying to create, $1 million piece of art or music. You can just do it for the enjoyment of it, right? And there really is something about it that, as you say, like things you look forward to in life are often doing these things that are, seemingly have no objective value, you could say, but the subjective value is definitely there. right? Because it benefits you, and it really like benefits your soul even, right?
That's exactly it. I mean, I think soul work is a great way to describe it. And you mentioned quite a few things there, which I think are very important in the creative process. You know, one of them is its enjoyment. I say we as though everyone's like this. I generalize, so apologies, but I do feel we've stepped quite far away from joy, personal joy, and so it very much is a space of one enjoyment. And what's also important, you said, it's like moving away from a work of art. I don't think creativity is about an accomplishment. I think it's about maybe a personal accomplishment, but I kind of push myself through creativity. You know, I have this dream to write a better song every time I write a song. I'm not trying to write a song to sell a song. I never try write to sell. Because there's a formula to selling a song. I don't want to write a formula. I want to enjoy the process of writing a song. So, of course, you have an accomplishment of creating something, and you do want to you want to better yourself. But it's never about other people's eyes. I always feel like if it's first and foremost about self, your own eyes. And you know, when you're enjoying something, you do get lost in the process. And I think if you're losing yourself in the process, and the other thing is you leave feeling exhausted but energized. I always find creativity is such a paradox. You know, you're exhausted but you're energized. You've wasted away lots of time, but you think you've done so much with your time. It's a wonderful middle ground that we're in.
It's definitely paradoxical, like most things. Evidently in the world are quite paradoxical. And that it's the strange sense of you're doing something worthwhile, even if there's no like physical reward for it. Although you do get a piece of art or a piece of music or whatever it is that you're working on, and you put a whole lot of effort and energy into it, but you feel good afterwards. It's not like you're doing something where you don't like doing it, and afterwards you just feel drained and you feel like shit anyway, and then there's no like drive of like that was worth doing, and that relaxation at the end of it where you're like, you know, shoo, like that was awesome. Or alternatively you're like, that was a shit, you know, way to spend the time. And I think that this is something that everyone can do, right? It might not look the same for everyone. You know, like for me, with zero musical skills or inclination, it doesn't make sense for me to do music at the moment. I mean, perhaps one day I'll start and get into it. But for me, like the creativity comes out in conversation, and like I get to do this podcast and I get to work with people, and it comes out in that way. And similarly, you could do it with like any sort of woodwork or metalwork or whatever it is you're doing, or even, you know, like even if you have some sort of like a desk job, like you can incorporate that in where you're just letting yourself do what you need to do and go through it carefully and with a passion and an energy that's exciting and that you know, fulfills soul work. And not everything does it, obviously, but it's important to like figure out how to do that for yourself, right? Yeah. And I guess everyone has some inclination of what they enjoy doing. You know, actually, it could be something like video games, where it's an extremely creative opportunity to work on skills and to communicate with people and to navigate things. And it just depends on how you approach all of it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's such a fascinating thing that you say in terms of where to find this creativity, because yes, it's in the things that we do, but you know, my daughter's 4 and she wants to play all the time. And for me, that's a big part of the creative process. Is if it feels like play, that's a very good feeling. Like if you feel like you're playing with, tinkering with fixing a bike, or you're playing with podcasts, or that you're in a good zone. And it's interesting because my daughter she just lays it out in front of me. You know, there's a fire hydrant, one right outside our house, and she's always on it, and she always, and it's a rocket. She sees it as a rocket, and she always wants me to climb in the rocket with her. And it's interesting, this barrier that I have to break through to see what she's seeing. And and to actually play with her and to engage in the creative process. And it's quite frustrating sometimes because there's all these voices in my head that are telling me about how silly I look, or how it's, you're not a child anymore. But really, it's just me not allowing myself to go into that space. Because once you're in that space, you start to see things all around you, creative things all around you. I have this big dream, two big dreams. One is to write a musical, and I have no idea how to do that.
Right.
And I'll share the process that I'm on at the moment. Another one is to be a cartoonist, and I cannot draw at all. And so there's these conflicting voices in my head. One of pushing dreams, and the other one saying, "But you can't do this. Why would you waste your time doing this?" So and all I have to do is step into that space. And I think that's a big part of creativity. We were all born with it. There's no anyone who says I wasn't born with creativity. I think, how did you get to where you are then? How did you learn to talk? How did you learn to walk? These are all, testing things as kids. So we're all creative. It's about stepping into that zone.
Right, and like stepping out of your comfort zone, which is the sort of adult brain of, trying to view the world all like seriously, and no play and no fun, and you're worried about how you look or what people think or whether you should be doing this or not or whatever it is. But, children exactly are the exact exemplifiers of creative play, where it's just free, and they're not trying to be creative. They're not trying to do anything. They just want to have fun, right? Or they just want to explore or learn about the world, or, they walk along a sidewalk and they want to balance on the edge just to get a feel, for what's going on, and learn about their bodies and their relationship to the world. And you're right, everyone has to do this, right? And you can definitely get caught up in your own trap if you're in your head about, I'm not creative, or I don't have creativity, which doesn't really mean anything, right? It just means perhaps you're not trying new things that you want to do, or you're not allowing yourself to take that step where into the unknown, where you don't know how it's going to go, right?
Yeah.
And there's a possibility, according to, the sort of like critical voice in your head, of it looking bad or being a waste of time or not going so well. And if you can move past that and step into that zone, then the freedom opens and the space becomes available for you to express whatever it is. And you can get to play with kids, and you can get to join in on with games and see the world with almost an innocence, right? Where there's no there's no judgment going into it. You see a fire hydrant. Well, you don't see a fire hydrant. You see a rocket. You don't see a box. You see a car. It's not about what the thing is. It's not about how much stuff you have. You see a stick. It's a sword, or it's a gun, or it's a, it's just as much as your imagination can go. Basically, you're opening up yourself to that world. And like for you, with your dreams of, writing a musical and becoming a cartoonist, like the biggest step will be to just start, right?
Well, exactly.
Go ahead.
No, that's exactly it. The first step is just to start, and when you start, you're gonna get all that judgment. Those inner voices are gonna step in, and it's interesting because I learned this a long time ago, but I'm constantly making up stories. It's a big thing of mine. Names of characters, I get obsessed with it, right? And then I think, well, what's the backstory to that character? And I'm doing this all the time in my head, so it's quite crazy up in my head sometimes. But
not happening.
Yeah, but what's interesting is this concept of so let's say with the stories in my head, being a writer. Stories in my head don't make me a writer; they just make me a storyteller. But I haven't told a story; it's still stuck in my head. Yeah. And so the process of being a writer is me actually sitting down and writing the story. And so creative people, I feel, and maybe the stereotype is decreasing, but they get painted with quite a tough brush in terms of they they're just dreamers, or they're just the creatives that do stuff in the world are the ones that actually go and do something about what's sitting in their head. And so why I mention that is because I learned this the hard way, but the only way I can be a writer is if I write, which means that I set aside half an hour every day in my life to write. And what happens if you write every day for half an hour is you find your voice. So I've been writing now for 20 years, and I have a voice. I have a literary voice. What is interesting is just as a side note, how many people say, "Oh, you're a writer. Well, what have you published?" And I say, "Well, that's not the point. From a creative perspective, that's from a success perspective. But they're two very separate things." And so a big part, just back to your point, is that it's the doing that makes you the thing, not how much you sell, right? So you're correct. Mm-hmm. The moment I draw a cartoon, even if it's a stick figure, I've drawn a cartoon. If my inner judgment says, you're not a cartoonist because no one's going to look at that, well, that's a different thing altogether. The fact that I've sat down and come up with an idea and put pen to paper, that's me in the creative space.
Right.
If you want to make money from that, then maybe you move to innovation, right? That's innovation is creating value from an idea. But the idea is for me is the lifeblood. That's what keeps me alive, right? And
there's no innovation without the idea either.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And it's interesting. It's an important distinction to make, I think, between success and just being creative, right? Like, to some degree, it does matter, like, what product you produce if that's your goal, right? But if it's not your goal, if your goal is just to be creative because you enjoy it, then it doesn't matter what you produce, or it matters only to you, in terms of like how you feel about it, right? And as you had said, like, every time you write a song, you want to write better versions of it, but not because you're trying to sell tracks, because you're trying to just improve and, I guess, it's fulfill an idea in your head of how you dream it to sound or to write. I mean, I don't know what the right adjective is, but I guess it's also kind of a sound. It's just more in words. And I think that definitely stops a lot of people, because people go, well, I'm never going to be a famous rock star, so why am I going to play the guitar? Like, what's the point?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's a big barrier, because you don't have to even, that doesn't have to even be on the table to do it. You just have to want to do it for yourself. Right?
Yeah.
And I think that the best, like, if I think to, who are like the best musicians, just as an example, in creativity, like, the best musicians and the best albums by musicians are usually their first or second albums, where they're still writing the stuff themselves. They're not doing it because it's trying to make the most money. So the production side of it is on creating the best song, not creating the most sellable product, right? Now, the ones that do go that way, or they end up going that way, I mean, it makes sense why they do, and it's not a criticism of that, right? Like, if you're trying to make money and make a living, like, okay, you do what you got to do sometimes. But it's weird how it can have success but not have the same impact and meaning, right? So you might sell more, ironically, but not feel as empowered or passionate about the music you're creating, because something's been removed, or you're forcing something that's not there in order to try and sell, right?
Exactly.
And there's lots of examples of that, and we don't have to get into the specifics, but it's like it is a fine balance if you're trying to do it professionally, let's say, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I mean, what I hope, these are just, this is my experience of creativity from, and I've done a lot of reflection, from when I started and then all the way back into my childhood. But these are just my reflections on creativity. And I think it's very important to separate creativity from success, because if you're running a podcast on how to be successful from your creativity, you would have someone different on the podcast. My drive is I don't even want to say happiness. I keep it to the space of joy, but when I get to the end of my life, whenever that is, and I tally up how much time was spent in the things that I enjoy and how much time was spent in the things that I didn't enjoy, that for me is that's going to be a big part of that I have a successful life. So
Right.
so each person to their own. And I have to just share, I'm hugely envious of those people that are able to be passionate, creative, and enjoy what they do and make money from it.
Yeah.
I'm envious of it. I've never found how to find my creativity in the wealth side of things, but
Right.
I have personal wealth, and I'm very proud of it. So I think it's very important that the creativity and success is kind of separated. And it's interesting what you say about a lot of those bands. I mean, we can talk for ages. I can talk about music forever.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. You're so correct. How many bands and even albums that I listen to, there's an extra thing to the music production side of things. But in the first album of many artists, because they don't have the same budget they have for like the third or fourth album, it's not as well produced. And so what they're doing is they doing the best that they can with what they've got. Mm-hmm. And there's a rawness. Often there's a rawness and an electricity to this music. The songs are good. And it's interesting. I was listening to Uprising from Bob Marley 2 nights ago, and there's such a difference between Catch a Fire, which was his first kind of global springboard, to Uprising. And even the songs before, if you go before he became famous, there's a real kind of danger to the songs. And he's still good in Uprising. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
He's an amazing musician, but there's something that's just, I don't know, very syrupy, very, very sweet and beautiful about the first part. So yeah, I think as you grow into success, and just, sorry, one more thing, but just Springsteen, that's what I love about Bruce Springsteen is just when he's getting too polished, he like goes back. He goes back to, he did Born in the USA, and then he went back to Nebraska, which was just him in a 4-track. It's just raw and it's great, So, I feel he's someone who's really plugged into this concept of letting the channel come, rather than staying with the success.
No, you're right, and it's a good point. There are good examples of like very successful musicians who don't fall into that trap. Right, or who have somehow managed to navigate. It's not a trap. It's just, it's also, I think it happens unintentionally a lot of the time. Like, with artists that start to make much more money, and so the focus perhaps changes just naturally. And so something might, I guess there's pros and cons, right? Like you get better quality, you get higher production, your marketing budgets increase, so your reach increases. So there's a lot of good that happens there, but sometimes perhaps you lose that rawness, but not always, right? Like with Springsteen, they know that if they go too far in one direction, it doesn't work for them the same, right? And it probably comes down to a feeling of like,
that's exactly it.
What am I creating, and does this fulfill me?
Yeah.
Right. Even whether it's financially the most successful or not, I guess, and the luckiest artists, I use lucky sort of loosely, but like the luckiest artists can have that choice. At least they can think about it that way. It's not about a restriction. It's more just like they're able to say, okay, I've reached a point of financial success where I'm sufficiently happy with what it is, and I'm not trying to grow exponentially just forever. And they can kind of take a step back and say, well, how do I make the best music that I can for me, which I know now translates into the best or the most well-received songs, right? And for them, it might be going back to do small shows or, like single or small band productions and not arenas and stadiums, right? And so it's definitely interesting to see how that like plays out. Right?
Yeah.
And it does come, I mean, just to like bring it back to this, like the creativity process, what you had said about the channeling, right, is that there does seem to be this zone that people get into particularly performers, but generally speaking, people, it happens to everyone when you're fully engaged in a task and you're not resisting whatever it is that you're doing, despite it might be challenging, right? Like, so it's not that it's easy, but that you're engaged with it and something's like flowing through you and you're just being a vessel for whatever it is that's coming out. And it's really weird to kind of think about and talk about, because it kind of transcends language to some degree, where you're describing experience, which is very difficult, whereas there's something about it that people, I feel like, can connect with, in the sense of like, oh, I know what that is. I also don't know how to explain what it is, or perhaps I don't even know why I know what it is, but something resonates. Right. Yeah. And I think that's what happens with people. And when we talk about creativity, is that they're like, oh, and I kind of know what you're talking about, even though it's difficult to describe or define.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've said so many great things there, and I really want to unpack two things, which for me are so important. Or maybe one is my agenda, but the first thing is, and I cannot say this guy's name. I know his name. I just cannot say it. It's Mikhail. It's a long name. Anyway, with many consonants. But he wrote a book called Flow, and he's a psychologist, and he did research exactly on what you're talking about. That when you're in that zone of creativity, you're in flow, and kind of time disappears. And just to share one story, my wife, who's an ex-choreographer, that's where she was a dancer, that's where she used to get her energy. And since she's become a mom, she's moved away from that. And now gardening is where she gets her energy. And when she's out in the garden, time disappears. Now she's still learning about how to garden. You know, we came from South Africa, which was fertile soil and fertile weather, to Canada, where you have a very limited period to plant. And so she's learning this whole thing, but she's learning by doing. So trial and error, and she's loving it. And the two things I want to mention in that story is one is when she's gardening, she's in her flow. She's in her flow, and time disappears. I have to say, it's like 9 o'clock and she's still out there. Yeah. But the other thing is, which is very interesting, is she plants way too early. So everyone's saying in Canada, get up 24th of May, that's a good time to plant. Right. And she's already planting by March. So our house from March to May looks like a greenhouse, but it's in our living room. And what's interesting is everyone says, you're going too early, you're going too early. But what they're not seeing is that she's so excited that she just wants to test. And that's all she's doing. Yeah. She's experimenting with plants and with seeds, and seeing how long they're going to last indoors. So she's building up this knowledge, but everyone she speaks to says, no, it's not going to work. And often it doesn't work, but it's a trial and error. But they're missing the point. It's not about the outcome. Yeah. She's totally in her flow. She loves it. So let her do it. Yeah. And she's in her creativity. The other thing I wanted to mention, which is very important from a coaching perspective, is what creativity does for us. And that's why we even have to test our creativity all the time. You know, if you ask me to write a song now on guitar, give me an hour, I'll have a song for you. I have a bank of 800 songs. I think they're all good, but because it's now my neural pathways have been shaped. And so what I've done recently is I'm starting to learn two instruments which I've never learned before. One is a piano and one is an accordion, which is going to start soon. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to reshape my neural pathways. And when we feel stuck in life, we feel we can't go forward. It's because we are in a comfort zone and our neural pathways have been set. And what we don't recognize is we can reshape our neural pathways, and creativity allows us to do that. It just means we have to fail a bit, and it's hard to fail, so we just stay in our comfort zones. But creativity gives us that platform to try something where we reshape neural pathways. And it's interesting. I want to go back to something you said right earlier on, but children can see a fire hydrant as a rocket. But you can also take that and extrapolate that to your life. You know, you can see something that you're fearful. You can also see that as something different, as a challenge, so that ability to see something differently is actually so important. And we get better at it if we keep on challenging our neural pathways, because that's about seeing something different. So there's really the two things there. One is the flow, where it fills your soul, and two is the challenge of creativity.
Yeah. And it's a good point. Both of those are good points, but I'll just, on the point of the challenge, right? Like, I think I found personally in my life, it's like that the fear of failure can be so overwhelming that it prevents you from starting, right?
Yeah.
And it's very curious about why this fear of failure even exists in me, right? And sure, we could look at it psychologically and see if there's some sources in childhood or whatever it is, but I think it's broader than that, in the sense of, like, doing new things is really hard. And until you have those set pathways that you can rely on to essentially be in a state of flow while being creative and being challenged, like, there's a big learning curve that needs to kind of happen. And if you can accept that that's the case, and that you are going to fail, and you're going to fail probably more than you'll succeed if you even call it those kinds of things, right? Like, you're right. It depends on how you view it, because you can view it as a failure, or you can view it as just a lesson, right? And there's a distinction between the two in terms of how you feel about yourself about the situation, right? If you're playing a song, or if you're learning to play the piano or the accordion, and you mess up because your fingers don't know where to go exactly, it can either be very demoralizing and upsetting, and it can stop you from continuing because you're like, this sucks, I just want to play good music and I can't, so I'm not going to do it anymore, right? And that's somewhat of a natural reaction for a lot of people. Or maybe, and in addition to, it depends on how you think about things, but you can say, okay, little setback, like, I have to at least be patient with myself, allow my brain and my body to learn these new movements that I've never done before, right? And if you think about how long it takes to learn anything, it takes fucking forever a lot of the time, right? It does. And it's okay that that's the case, because there doesn't have to be a goal. I mean, you can have little goals, but it's like, it's fine to be on the path and just do, right? And that's in that state of flow is when you're not worried about the consequences of what you're doing, and you're just enjoying whatever it is that you're doing, and you're growing because it's difficult and you're doing new things. Or, like, with your wife in the garden, it's like, yeah, okay, a bunch of plants aren't going to make it. And that's, maybe a bit sad for the plants, but it's fine. Like, it'll be a lesson, for her that, okay, well, it's not just because people tell me that I shouldn't plant before May 24 because of the frost or whatever. It's like, no, I mean, I'm trying new things. And you know what? If people didn't do that, there might never be innovation, and there might never be a new way of doing things, because it's also possible that perhaps she discovers that some plants you can plant long before May 24 and enjoy them for like an extra month or 2 months of the year, which are precious in Canadian weather time. But sometimes it doesn't work out that way, and then you'll know for next time or whatever, right? Or you'll know you'll set up a greenhouse inside or do something different. But that's not what's important. The important part is just being there and just enjoying what you're doing despite its challenge, right? Yeah. But it's difficult, right, to do that.
It's difficult, and it really is difficult. And again, there's it's so interesting. There's a thought process almost that I would probably not challenge with you, but just it's great that you brought it up. It's such a lovely thought process. And I'm not going to say this is true or not. It's a great debate. But as you were talking, I thought it's interesting that creativity could also be your armor against failure, because I'm only failing because I'm comparing myself to someone or something that I want to be, right? Yeah. So I'm not failing at the piano at the moment, but what I do is I play 10 minutes of piano every day. 10 minutes, which equates to 40 minutes of piano a week. And now, after a year of doing it, literally it's been a year, I can now play, in fact, less, it's been 8 months. I'm not more talented than anyone else. I'm a terrible piano player, but I can play 3 songs.
Yeah.
And I played one to a friend of mine the other day, and he was like, wow, man, you can play that Coldplay song. And I said, yeah. And it took 10 minutes a day, but I didn't have an expectation of wanting to sound like, I don't know, Liberace, in 2 years, because then I'm a failure.
Yeah.
Liberace could probably play this song with one finger better than I played with 2 hands. But once you put the comparison, then then everything you do is a failure. But I haven't failed at the piano yet because I don't have an achievement that I want to get to, but I'm definitely getting better. And the second thing I want to mention, so that's the one thing, is that yes, you're failing all the time, but actually, if it's just creativity, then you're more enjoying than failing, because you haven't pegged it against what you want to be. If you said, I want to sell a book in 2 years' time, and you don't, then you failed, sure. But maybe you missed out on the process. The process is what's important. Did you enjoy writing that book for 2 years? Well, then you've passed. You didn't fail, you passed. The second thing is my wife's got a great story to tell. It's fascinating. We were with people last night, and they said, are you planting, whatever? And she said, last year we grew 2 pumpkins. That's all that came out of our massive pumpkin plant, 2 pumpkins. And they were this size. Yeah. They were just tiny. We couldn't even eat them. They were so small. Right. We grew a watermelon, and it was the size of a marble, but fully grown. And it's a story we tell. And so what creativity gives you is this connection to like-minded people. We've made gardener friends in the neighborhood because my wife's telling her story. I'm not friends with him, but she's telling her story. And so what it gives you is this connection, which I think which you can't almost put it into success or failure terms. It's friendships, it's networking, but it's connection. And the last thing, which it came up when you were talking, which is interesting, is I try to stay away from gurus, because eventually humans are humans, right? So then you go, it's just a human. They let you down. So, but there's someone who I've been very gentle with. Like I don't try and see his home life. But he's Sir Ken Robinson, and he's written 2 great books on creativity. The Element, one's called The Element, and one's called Finding Your Purpose, or Finding the Element. But he tells this great story in one of his TED Talks. His TED Talks are really big and millions of views. But he tells this great story of this classroom of kids, and they're drawing pictures of anything that they want. Yeah. And the teacher walks past the one child, and she says, Jane, what are you drawing a picture of? And the little girl says, ma'am, I'm drawing a picture of God. She says, yeah, but Jane, no one knows what God looks like. And she says, I know, ma'am, but they will in a minute. And that's the beauty of creativity, is that if you take it away from I want it to be that thing, and it's the process, then you can do whatever you want. Yeah,
and it doesn't matter what other people think.
Right? Doesn't matter. In fact, sometimes they're not even allowed in on the process.
Right.
Because it's got nothing to do with them.
They shouldn't be in on the process.
Right.
You don't want them there.
Yeah. I mean, I don't tell people I'm an author unless they express an interest in books and we start talking about reading, because invariably the first question if you say to someone, I'm an author, the first question will be, what have you published? Yeah. And then you say nothing, and then that's it. They're not interested in, well, what's your stories about? I want to tell you my stories. And what you're hoping for when someone says, are you an author? You say, I am. And they say, me too. And then you're in. That's great. You talk about your process. You talk about, then you're in. That for me is the gold, right? So, and again, this is all my process on creativity.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, it's very interesting, because it's true. And I think the world we live in today is very focused on outcome, right? Too focused, you might say, in probably most places, where the bottom line or the final product or, the number of sales that you do, like that's all that matters in some sense. And it can be horribly restrictive and, demoralizing. I mean, like even with the pumpkins and things that you grew, it's like, well, some people would have looked at that and and would have said like, oh, this is useless. Like the store pumpkins are 10 times this. Why would I tell anyone about this? Right? Like it's just a failure. But you can look at it that way if you want, but it's not a nice way. It's not going to feel good. And it's not true either, because it's only important if you're making the comparison, right? Because you could also just compare to no pumpkins, and then you've got a great success. You got too many pumpkins, and that's, at least too many pumpkins better than zero. If you're wanting to compare, but you don't even need to do that. You can just be like, wow, look what we did. Like, this is amazing, just as is. It doesn't need to be better. It doesn't need to be different from what it is. It's good, or it's nice as it is, right?
Yeah.
And as you say, like when people ask you if you're, you say you're an author, and people are like, well, what have you published? And then you say nothing. I guess it's quite a stumping question.
Where'd you go
after that? Where'd you go? I mean, my thought would be like, what have you written? Right? Not like, because I think there's a distinction between writing and publishing. Because I know lots of people who write stuff or self-publish or whatever it is, and it's like, oh, it's fine. I don't mind that. Like, just tell me what your stuff's about, or what do you like writing about, to give one of the questions, or what kind of music do you like to play, or the conversation can go forwards. The person just has to be open and willing to do it, right? And perhaps it depends on the interaction and whether it's just some like niceties or polite conversation. I'm not usually into those kind of conversations. I usually jump right in. I'm like, let's go deep, Like, I don't want to talk about the weather. Let's talk about your life. And I guess that's kind of why I'm doing a podcast, is because I get to have those conversations with people. But it's definitely a fine balance. And for people, I would think that what's important is to figure out what it is meaningful to you, right? In one's own life, and then be able to work through that.
Yeah, I think, if I go into your podcast world, what you've described to me is just where you get enjoyment, right? So the conversation, the deep conversation, and what you've done is you've said that's where time can disappear, right? I'm in my zone, I'm in my flow.
Yeah. And
so that's creativity, and that's you in this doing, and this doing is part of your process. Yes, you have ideals, of course, but the first and foremost step is to say, what do I love? I love this, and I'm going to try and bring it as much as I can into my everyday. And so. It's interesting. It's because that question of again, I'm going to go back to creativity. For me, it's I go back to the bank balance of life, right? When I get to the end, will I've spent more time in enjoyment than not? And I get enjoyment from creativity. Yes, I get enjoyment from watching a Netflix. Absolutely. But I can guarantee, I've heard it. I've heard it through lockdown. Lockdown's been a fascinating insight into creativity. And for those who haven't attached to creativity, I highly challenge them to go out and find out what it was that they used to enjoy that they've lost touch with. Because people have said to me, I've heard it in conversations through lockdown, I'm bored of Netflix. You don't get bored in creativity. I don't get bored of writing songs. What happens is I want to write a better song. So I get bored of writing the same song, but that means I can write a better song, a different song. Writer's block is wonderful because you get angry in writer's block. And when you're in anger, that's a very good energy to have. Not angry at the world, but angry about, I want to write better. So you get this boost of energy to challenge yourself. Creativity brings that. People who are bored, people who are listless, have no energy. That's the challenge. There is find the creativity. You're not going to find it in the movies. You might find it if you see a movie and you say, "I would like to write a script like that." Then go write that script. That's what the movie's done for you. And so for me, that's the key part of this creativity. And when I talk about books. It's when someone says, "What have you published?" It's almost like a deflating comment for me. like deflating. I'm like, oh, because then I can go into failure, right? I've got my own little self-doubt hanging there. That's from my past. Shane, at some point we can have a podcast about my background, my stories. But I don't like that comment because my inner voice goes, yeah, you see, you're a failure.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I've actually written 3 novels, whether they get published or not. I mean, it's interesting, my favorite novel of all time, which is not for everyone's palate, but it's a novel called Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. I don't know how someone wrote a book of 1,000 pages that good. And
right.
And I don't know his story, but I know that he committed suicide, I think at the age of 49, And my brain can't compute that. I'm like, I would dream of writing a book like this. But he must have been in agony for however long in his life. There's another great album of a guy. I'm trying to think of the band's name now, but the guy released this album recently, 2 years ago, and then same thing, committed suicide in his 40s. Released this immaculate album, and I think, how did you? And then, because potentially, look, maybe in trauma or in difficulty or whatever it is, but was successful. Something about the success, I don't know, can soil the creative process. I'm not saying don't be successful, please. Those creative successful, go for it. But there's something about that creative process that's vital.
I think you're right, and I think it comes to, well, perhaps an oversimplification, but it's looking for the meaning in the success rather than in the process or in the art itself, right? And it's a common thought of everyone to be like, well, once I reach this point in my life, or once I achieve this, or once I get this amount of money, or once I meet this person, or have this, or then I'll be happy, or then I'll be fine, or then I'll be okay. But it doesn't actually end up working like that. Fortunately or unfortunately, it depends on how you look at it. But I mean, you're right. Like, there's suicide in people who have had, commercial success for all time. And you'd think, like, who could ask for a better life than like a rock star or like a famous author who just, they have as much money as they could spend. They get to spend their time however they want, and yet they suffer miserably and end up, killing themselves a lot of the time, which is tragic. And it can be disheartening for like pursuit of success, but I think it's good in putting into perspective what's important, right? Because the success might make you happy temporarily, right? So you might ride the wave of becoming famous or becoming a rock star, and you might ride that wave for a little bit, but eventually your old self will still catch up with you with doubts, and all sorts of new challenges come along that you didn't anticipate that you have to deal with. You might become so famous that you can't leave your house anymore without a riot starting. And then you have to spend your whole life indoors, and you don't know the people who you meet. Everyone just wants something from you, right? You don't get to form genuine relationships. And you didn't anticipate that when you were dreaming about it, as a kid or whatever. And it's not
exactly.
It's not that it's not worth doing, but it's that if you're looking to the success to give you happiness, it's probably not going to work as well as you'd hope, right? You've got to find that happiness or the joy or the meaning in the things that you do just in your everyday life, right? And that's in your family, in peace within yourself, right? Doing things that feed your soul, whatever it might be, right? And like that's, I think, where and there is an opportunity for people to do that, because we all have that capacity to feel that joy, and perhaps it's not 100% of the time, but you can certainly work towards making it more substantial than, than very rarely, which is the case for many people, right? And I would say it comes down to a mindset in a sense. Although it's not, it's actually even beyond that. It's not even your thoughts about the situation. It's more like an attitude or a disposition or something that's transcendent, that just is an inner peace with the situation, and you're not looking for yourself or for happiness in the situation, but just like within yourself, right?
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. Yeah, you've nailed it. And no, and I think it is. I like what you said at the beginning, that maybe it's putting it too simply. I think it is simple. I don't want to make life simple, or I don't mean it like that. But I feel that, even in thinking about this podcast, I think, what's the value that I could give to people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if we're going to have a conversation, someone's going to listen. What would they want to get from it,
Mm-hmm.
And I feel, and I've read many books, and every time I read a book, I'm looking for an answer, and I finish the book and I think, I don't know if I've got the answer.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the answer is, actually. That's, I battle sometimes what the question is that I'm looking for.
Right.
But I think the question is to feel a lot more at ease, rather than pent up or worried or stressed. That's just a bit of calm, the calm that you get when you're on vacation or whatever. And again, I'm banging on the same door or banging on the same drum, but I get that calm when I'm in creativity. I wake up early every day, because if I don't get my half an hour of writing. But I'm going to be so arrogant here, but I'm my own best comic. I make myself laugh more than anyone makes me laugh. I make myself laugh, and I think that my novels are filled with this gorgeous, wonderful laughter, and I create it.
That's
now,
the best, though.
It's the best, and so it's half an hour of what you might term therapy, or what you might term laughter, what you might term meditation. I'm in my zone, and no thoughts about, am I meeting my deadlines at work, or am I doing this, or none of those thoughts enter for that half hour. Now, that is meditation, and that's what they say in meditation. And that's why I struggle with meditation. I find more meditation in my creative process, because part of meditation is to clear the mind. Well, there's nothing in my mind other than, what does this character say next when I'm writing? Or where does this song go next? Or this line is so bad, how do I fix it up? And so it really, for me, it is simple. It is that in that moment, and I feel everyone can get into that moment, whatever it is. It could be walking dogs. I don't know. Some people, I see them, they off with the fairies as they're walking their dogs, and I think that's amazing. Look at them. They off. They're meditating. And then you say to them, "Do you meditate?" They say, "No, I don't meditate."
Yeah.
I watched someone the other day. They said something. And I'm tired these days, so I can't. But they said something, and I thought, I wish I could say that. What they said was so clever to their child. It was like so playful. And I said, that was amazing. They said, what did I say? They were in the zone. So I think we tap in all the time.
That happens to me a lot, actually. Ironically, people will come up, and say things to me. They'll be like, when you said this, it really had a meaningful impact to me. And I was like, oh, okay. I'm glad that it did. In my head, I'm like, I don't remember saying that. I don't even remember what I was talking about when I said that, or what I was trying to achieve. And I mean, it's a bit of a weird situation, but I kind of I've accepted that that's just how it is, because when I do speak, to people, I try and not think about anything. I try and just be in the moment, and whatever comes out, comes out. And I'm not trying to remember it either, right? Because that's not what's important. I trust that whatever flows through me in the moment is exactly what's needed for the conversation, podcast or not, just generally speaking, right? And I've found that once I accepted that to be the case, and I wasn't trying to do anything, or particularly if you try and impress people with things, that usually doesn't go as well as you would want it to, when the best way to do it, paradoxically, is to not try at all and just be. And then people are impressed, and you're like, well, this is bullshit. But that's just how it works, right? I mean, it's a very strange occurrence. And I don't take it. It's not like I don't get any ego boost or anything from it. When people say that something that I said was impactful to them, I'm like, that's great. What I said was relatively unimportant in the big scheme of things, but if you took a message from it that affected you and helped you, then that's awesome. Everybody wins, right?
Exactly.
I'm not some person who knows shit. I don't pretend to know anything or be an expert on anything. I don't know anything about, real serious topics. I can just speculate most of the time, or just see what thoughts come to mind. But yeah, just to bring it back, it's like everyone can be in that state of creative flow, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, we are a lot of the time, or some of the time, and we just don't remember it because our mind often just deems it as unimportant, right?
Yeah.
It's not memorable particularly, so you don't think about when you're doing it. And it's interesting that you bring the dog walking thing up, because like my family have this thing about walking dogs every day, and it's great for the dogs, but they do it mostly for themselves, and they refuse to accept this fact. But if my dad doesn't walk his dogs like every day, he's upset, right? He's like, I didn't walk the dogs today, and it's got nothing to do with the dogs. The dogs are fine. They're happy. Sure. I mean, it's obviously good to exercise your dogs, and that's really stimulating for them. And you do want to give them that opportunity, but they're not sitting and sulking because they didn't go on a walk. He's sitting and sulking because he didn't go on a walk. And it's because he didn't have that, hour of meditation where he was just walking. He doesn't listen to music. He doesn't do anything. He just walks with the dogs. He doesn't have to think about anything in particular. And he just gets to be in the world and just not think, right? Which is the creative process that we were talking about. It's that state of flow that just comes out in that way for him. And it's amazing that he has that opportunity and that he can do that. And, he does take time every day to walk the dogs. And everyone benefits from it because of it.
And what's interesting is on that is everyone can attest to this. They've just got to dig a bit deep if they can't attest to this. But I call it the antenna. But your antenna's on all the time, and it's on to receive. It's on to receive ideas. It's on to receive connections, if you want to go, but psychic vibrations, but it's on all the time. And when where it gets its best signal is when you're not busy, when you are in that meditative space. So it's ironic that when you're being creative, your antenna's up, and then your ideas start to come. But your dad on that walk, check in with him, but you probably find he comes back energized, but also with ideas, or maybe what he's done is played out how the day was and thinking, next time I'll do it this way. That's creativity. You're thinking about how to do something differently, or with originality, or whatever it is. So those spaces are vital, and those creative spaces, because they allow the antenna to receive. And I feel when we don't receive, that's when we get stuck. It's interesting. There's a concept of repetitive displacement behavior, which is really what animals caged in the zoo get. And what it is they walk back and forth, in their little cage, and they become bored and dull. But our brains are exactly the same. They are plastic, right? Neuroplasticity. So what you feed your brain is gonna give it the ability to mold and shape, and often we're like the tigers in the cage, repetitive displacement behavior, because we're just doing the same things over and over, and so our brains have become hardened and dull, and but the antenna's always up, ready for a change or a shift, and we just have to give it the space, the play space, a walk, whatever it is.
So if you were going to coach someone, let's say generally speaking, to the average listener, right? Just in terms of, so it doesn't have to be super specific. It's like, how would you encourage someone to enter that space within their life in order to be able to receive and to change and to, well, not even change, just to have some experience of creativity that they feel like they might be lacking, or that they're yearning for, or even if they just want to explore, just based on interest. It's like, what's the best way to start if you feel like you aren't doing it, even though you perhaps might be?
It's a great question. And I could actually go a number of ways to answer it. I suppose the first question, it might be harsh what I'd say, but the first question is do they want to?
Right.
And if they say they do, I say, why are they doing it at the moment? And if not, why are they not doing it? What's the stumbling block? Mm-hmm. Okay. But I think, and that's an important first step because it's interesting. It's not just about creativity, but we can kind of put it in the blanket of creativity. Mm-hmm. We all know what we meant to be doing. We all meant to sleep 8 hours a night. We all know we should all not be drinking so much or eating those foods. We all know what we're meant to be doing, right. But we get stuck and we don't do the things we're meant to be doing. And so the first step would be, do you want to? And right. And what's stopping you from doing it? And the second thing I would just check in with would be, what do people want to do? What is it that they would do? Like what really fuels the fire? What gets them excited? For you said it, but you're doing it. You're doing podcasts. You said deep conversations. I want to have a conversation with you, and I want to go deep. And then it's once if you'd come to me and said, Dave, what do I do? I say, well, what do you enjoy doing? It would come out at some point. I want to have conversations. Then it's just a short hop to say, well, how can you do that? Mm-hmm. And eventually you've come to it by yourself, but you would come to podcasts. And so the process of the conversation I'd have with the person is to find out what it is that really fuels their fire. Where do they get lost? Mm-hmm. Do they get lost in reading? Is there something there? Do they get lost in music? Do they get lost in cooking? Do they get lost in walking dogs? You've got to find out where they get lost. And the last thing I'd say is, can they carve out time for it?
Yeah. To start.
Yeah. It sounds so simple, but that's where I would go with it.
Yeah. No, I think those are great points. And also to I would say, just to add, to remember that, like, as we had said, like, it doesn't just happen, right? And it's often you face against extreme resistance within yourself to doing it, despite knowing that you want to do it. I mean, as an example, like, I bought the gear for my podcast, like the microphone and the headphones and that, like 6 months before I recorded my first episode, because it took that long for me to get into a mental space where I was ready to start. But I had the desire and the idea long before. Right. But for whatever reason, it just took a while before I actually got the, I guess, courage to just start and then keep going, or whatever it is. And it's like, I mean, I don't know how I'm going to, transform this into something bigger or successful, or and perhaps it won't. And maybe that's okay. And maybe it just leads to something else. But at the moment, it's like I feel so lucky to be in a position where I can do this. Even just for me, right? Like, the conversations that I've had with people, they've been so great. And if no one listens to them, that's fine. Like, they've been hugely impactful and influential on my life, that they've been worth doing just for that. Yeah. Right. And absolutely. And I couldn't have asked for it to be better than the way that it is. Right. Yeah. But it does take a lot, and there's a huge resistance that comes in, and all sorts of challenges that I didn't imagine would be a problem, which I'm now facing. But it's like, okay, that's fine. That's just part of the journey that I have to be on if I want to keep doing this. Right. Yeah. And you also don't get out of challenge no matter what you do. Life will throw you some good ones.
I don't think you should get out of challenge. And I think you constantly have to be in a discomfort zone of about 20%. So if you're too far out of your comfort zone, it's going to be too scary. But so you've always got to be within that 20% zone of discomfort. Then the challenge is you're challenging. So you're shaping neural pathways, and you're challenging self, and you're doing something different.
And it's manageable.
And it's manageable. And the other thing I'd ask you is those 6 months when you were figuring it out, did you feel like you had purpose?
No, but I had been looking for a purpose as we would say, for, I don't know, 20 years or something before then, where I'm like, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know how to know what I want to do. I kind of know what things I like, but I don't have any like passion for anything. At some point, I figured out that I was like, oh, well, what I like to do is to talk to people, right? Like, that's what I like to do. And I like to learn things. And so, at university, I did like philosophy and psychology because I was like, I enjoy those things and maybe it'll go somewhere and maybe it won't. But I can at least get benefit from just doing that by itself is good enough. And then I started a job and that was fine. Like, it was in sales and it just doesn't fit my personality. And, some people love it and good for them. So it's not like it's all sales are bad. It was just, for me, that just, it, wasn't good. And then eventually I was like, oh, maybe I want to do like therapy because that's talking to people, right? And helping them and things like that. And I actually did. I started a program and I did like 8 or 9 months. And I was like, I don't want to do this at all. Like, I'm doing this because I think it might lead to something else, but that's just not for me, right? I mean, therapy is hugely important and I love being a client in therapy, but the prospect of being a therapist was just, it's not, I don't know. I don't think I'm emotionally stable enough to contain problems 24 hours a day of other people, and some people are, and, God bless those who are. Like my parents are both therapists. And so, but then eventually it led to this point where it was a very difficult transition period of like forcing myself to have to make difficult decisions about what's meaningful or where I at least want to try and go to do something for myself, instead of like what I should be doing in quotes, right? And it led here, and I'd always been a fan of podcasts for many, many years, and I'd always like fantasized about doing one, and I knew like deep down somewhere that like I could do it because I luckily can converse relatively easily with most people about a variety of topics, even though I don't claim to be knowledgeable about anything in particular. I'm happy to just sit and ask questions and engage and listen, right? And then one day I was just like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to try, right? And then I bought the equipment, and then it took like 6 months before I got that to a point where I felt like, okay, I'm ready to start. And once I had done that, then it kind of gets the ball rolling, And that was just a short one of my journey, but here we are.
Well, you do it very well, and it's interesting because there's a number of trial and error processes that you that got you to this point.
Even still, it's trial
even
and
still,
error.
even still, yeah. But as you were talking, it's interesting. You asked the question, what would I say to people, and how would I engage with someone? I would also add then just to that to what your process and if I was engaging with someone, I mean, if I think if it was advice I was giving, and advice is always tough because it's advice for my life. This is my experience, not, it might not resonate with anyone else. But what I would say is, number one, to remove the concept of time from this process of creativity. That I'm too old, or I should have done it when I was younger, or that must be removed. This is not about achievement, right? This is, yes, it's achievement, it's personal achievement, but I would remove time from the process, and I would also remove those, there's these inner voices. The shouldn't do that, or why are you doing that, or you'll look silly, or all of that stuff. That's hugely debilitating for a creative process. I really do. Where I'm appealing is to the child inside, to the child that has been lost somewhere. Maybe in the education system, maybe it got lost there. Maybe it got lost with parents, not wittingly, but I appeal to the child inside, because the child knows how to have fun and knows how to play. And I think it's as simple as that. That's what creativity is. It's about fun and play. And fun doesn't mean not challenge, not difficult, not failure, not hurt yourself. My daughter came home last week. I have to tell you, it looked like she'd been knocked out by someone with a fat lip and a nose a bit skew. And she's 4, and she was playing, and having a great time doing it. And so there's injuries along the way, of course. But what we're attaching to is this idea of expression, self-expression, soul work, and that's really for me the core of all of this.
Find what feeds your soul.
Yeah. And to try and it's kind of eliminate this inner fear or the scared part of that. A song came on the radio this morning. Not radio. I lied to you. It's not a radio. I do my own playlists. I'm that kind of person. And a song came on, and I got the beat right. I got the groove. It's like 6:30 in the morning, and I got self-conscious that the neighbors could all see, because there's 2 neighbors that can see in.
Right.
So I'm doing this like weird.
Yeah.
My body wants to move. Let it move. Yeah. It wants to move. Let it go. What is holding me back? What is that thing holding me back? That thing. That's what we got to get a hold of.
Yeah. And that can happen to you when you're by yourself. You can feel embarrassed, and it's a very peculiar experience.
Unbelievable. So, and then you take that further, where you go, oh, I'd love to do a tapestry. Oh, but it's for when you're young. What am I going to do with it? Waste of time. I'd love to learn to knit.
Yeah.
I'd love to design my own children's toys, but and how long knitting takes, and off goes that voice. Right. And knitting's, then you got the stereotypes that attach themselves to knitting. Hey Dave, what did you do this weekend? I played some golf. What did you do? I knitted. You got, so, but in me, it's this desire, and the longer I wait for it, the older I get. So there's no time, and there's no, so I would say if you can eliminate that stuff, which I say it, I work on that as well.
Yeah, everyone does, right? Like that's the part of the life process is just figuring out how to deal with yourself. And it's also how you feel about what you're doing, right? Like if you're passionate about knitting and you speak with passion and you don't like have sort of embarrassment attached to it, other people will get that and they'll be like, oh, that's quite cool,
Yeah.
Like, I wonder what he's knitting. Like maybe I should start knitting. It sounds like fun,
Yeah.
It's a great thing to do. And that's because you just are unashamedly, embracing yourself fundamentally.
That's it. And I think that's that for me is like, I'm kind of thinking of this on the spot, but that's almost like the Zen pinnacle of creativity. It's like your total self-expression. And I'm not talking about voyeurism, or I'm talking about this inner, like, total just it could be voyeurism. There's what's that South African performance artist name? But but that's his creativity. But it's really for me that, and there's a joie de vivre to it. It's just, I'm not saying you're always going to be happy doing it, but it's really yourself coming out, right? So, as I'm as you see, I'm just a big believer in creativity.
No, so am I, and it definitely is worth believing in and pursuing and finding your place in it, because the rewards that you get from it are just so worth it. It's what makes life worth living, as you say.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Dave, this has been an absolutely fabulous conversation. I really appreciate you coming on today, and I look forward to our next one. It's been great.
Yeah, Shane, thank you for the invite. It's been wonderful to shoot the breeze with you and go into some spaces that are really passionate for me. So it's very rare that I can have conversations like this. So thank you.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
All
right. We'll talk soon.
Absolutely. Cool.
All right. Bye.
Cheers.